This episode is an incredibly interesting one. I sit down with Hamza Shaikh, who works in the field of architecture. He's also a young dad, a young married Muslim man, 26 years old, and is running a podcast, a content creation platform, a postgrad degree in architecture, and working full-time in the field of architecture as well. He is clearly someone who's very academic and has a very bright head on his shoulders. I felt out of my depth in a lot of this conversation, which I love. And we spoke about some really interesting points. We did touch on architecture and kind of why it affects the lay person like myself and perhaps a lot of you guys watching this video. But we also discussed many other topics, some controversial, or at least ones that I struggled to wrap my head around. And I think also what Hamza did is challenged kind of those elements. And it was interesting. He's a lovely brother, a self-confessed coffee snob, which is always nice to have someone on the podcast who is equally obsessed with coffee as myself. And altogether, it leaves me kind of thinking about a lot of different things, this podcast with Hamza. He's clearly a very deep thinker. It was the first time we met. And as you guys know, a lot of these episodes that we shoot, you guys get to see the first time I meet someone. And I like to keep those conversations like that. I like to keep conversations raw because I want you guys to get the same feeling that I have when I'm speaking to somebody. You guys oftentimes are introduced to somebody brand new through this podcast, and I'll prefer as much as I can to also have those brand new conversations with individuals that I haven't really spoken to before, because then it's like we're all going through it together. And I think we definitely get that with this episode with Hamza. A very, very interesting character, a lovely brother, and someone who took the time out today despite feeling a bit under the weather, and despite also having work tomorrow and all these other things, and running a family. So I think you guys will actually enjoy this discussion. It leaves you with a lot to think about, and I imagine there'll be a lot of comments. But enjoy this as episode 445 of Freshly Grounded. Let's get into it.
And welcome to Freshly Grounded, the brand new podcast.
Well, it's not exactly brand new anymore, is it?
Welcome to Freshly Grounded, the podcast.
That's better.
Created by best friends Faisal and Sam.
Huh?
I said welcome to Freshly Grounded.
After that bit.
Created by
After that bit.
best friends Faisal and Sam.
Really?
It's very chill.
Good, because I have questions that I'll throw in during the thing.
Please. Yeah, it's very, very chill. It's so chill, in fact, that we're already on. We don't have any formalities. We just get started. So, welcome, Hamza.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
No problem at all, man. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Alaikum assalam. I'm all right. I'm struggling with a fever, so hence we couldn't do it in person. But there's nothing wrong with this. We got the hardware set up.
Yep.
So if I'm a bit lethargic, forgive me, because
you seem to have a character, from what I've seen in your videos and stuff. Anyway, that's fairly mellow and calculated. Would I be right in saying that from the stuff that I've seen?
I don't know. I mean, people in the earlier part of my life definitely wouldn't have said I was mellow.
Okay.
Maybe because you're talking to me while I'm got fever, you probably think I'm quite mellow. But no, I think I can be. I can be very, very
erratic.
Both. Yeah, I think I can equally be extremely extrinsic and really intrinsic. I think you need you need to choose the right mode to be in for the right moment, right?
That's true. That's having a lot of intelligence with your emotions, emotionally, intellectual. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not very great at that. I'm not great at that balance. I can only feel how I feel. Everyone knows how I'm feeling. I can't mask it. I'm horrible. As much as I love the idea of stoicism and how it kind of relates to Islam in so many ways, I'm an awful stoic.
But you're a married man.
That's true.
There must be a massive level of control you have over your emotions if you're in a successful marriage.
Yeah, I think you learn over time, don't you? How long have you been married now?
It's been about 4 years now.
A long back. Similar to me then. I've been married just over
Oh
5 years now. So around the same amount of
yeah.
time.
I see a lot of parallels in what you're doing and what I'm doing. I obviously I quite admire you. I'm inspired by what you've done.
Oh,
So
that's
I'm
humbling.
equally surprised why I'm here, and I'd actually like to know how and why you found me. Or
Yeah, so I put out a Instagram story post asking people if they had any recommendations of guests who had interesting careers, simply because out of nosiness or being intrigued, perhaps we'll go with that one. I'd love to just learn more about kind of people in who are in industries or places that I have no knowledge of. I suppose just to get an understanding as a layman, but also for our audience. And so I got an email from a follower who said you should check out this guy called Hamza Shaikh, and I haven't even responded to that email. And yet we're on the podcast, and that's awful. I'm very like strict with how emails should be sent out, how emails should be formulated. Yeah, I'm awful with replying, but the excuse I use is that it can be tough sometimes. But I will be responding definitely back to that
who
person,
was it?
inshallah, because I don't know. It was a follower. I couldn't tell you. I'll have the information. I'll forward you the information if you want. But in case they want to stay anonymous. But anyway,
Shout out to whoever that was.
This individual, you may not even know them. I mean, I imagine you don't know them because the way the email was written was. We do read our emails, so I hope it shows something. But I got a flurry of emails around that time after I put that post out, and I still haven't read all of them. Although that one, as the Qadr will have it, was opened. Oh gosh, where is it? I can't find it right now.
Yeah.
But they said Hamza Shaikh, and I think they gave a link to your YouTube channel or something, or at least mentioned that you have a YouTube channel. So I kind of checked it out, and I think you have a very warming character, and so I just love conversating with people. I hit you up,
Yeah,
and
man.
you very kindly
Thanks.
responded.
I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think there's a lot of interesting topics we could cover. From a personal point of view, we're obviously both young British Muslims who are married and have kids, trying to run some level of a media company and endeavors, and I think there's a lot to talk about just in that sense. But
Sure.
also, you told me you're interested in architecture, and there's so much which
Did I say I was interested in architecture? I don't think I said that.
I think you said you wanted to.
One thing I do is choose my words carefully because I'm conscious of them. I don't think I said I'm intrigued, I guess.
Uh-huh. Whoa. It sounds similar to me.
Yeah.
Either way, I think there's a lot to talk about in that area.
Yeah, there is definitely. So architecture to me sounds like it's something that we've always heard about because it's fundamental in life. We obviously know this, and that's the extent to where my knowledge of architecture kind of goes. Obviously, we understand that when a building is built, architecture is needed, or architects are needed before building commences. But why is it that you focus on creating content for both architects, aspiring architects, but also regular individuals who have no interest or in pursuing a career in architecture, but you seem to have this passion in educating people about architecture and why it's so important in people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get into that without going through the background and the history, but just to give a brief outline, and we can go deeper later. Well, first of all, architecture is known to be the hardest course to study in the entire world. It beats, physics and rocket science and all of that. Not because it's probably harder than those things, but based on the fact that the amount of education required and the amount of broad educational background needed in proportion to what you end up getting paid, and how much you spend on your education, it's regarded as one of the hardest subjects overall. So it's not an easy field to be in, but the whole other aspects, the whole other side to it is architecture is one of the most fascinating and exciting fields to be involved in, because it inherently involves the scientific rational thinking mind with the creative artistic mind. You cannot escape having to find that perfect balance between those two incredibly difficult ways of thinking. So that in that sense, architecture is one of the most difficult things to do well, in my opinion. And again, that's often why in education there's a lot of there's a lot of people who find education difficult, drop out early. Even when they're done with education, they complain a lot. And so, with all of this energy and all of this momentum in what I'm describing to be a very difficult field, you obviously have people who, if they stick to it, they're very passionate. If you're able to stick with something very difficult, I think you end up being very passionate about it, because you need to have passion to do something difficult. So in that sense, I think that's what kind of spurs on my passion to share the knowledge. Apart from that, as we were just talking about, I think at times I can be quite extrinsic and so what's the word? Extroverted, sorry. And so I've always wanted to, I've always liked to talk publicly. I've always liked to convey things in media, video format. So I think that's what kind of brought me to the whole content creation side of architecture, which is very difficult, and why you find so very few people in the field doing content creation. Because I work a full-time job. I'm going back into uni to do final postgrad to qualify my qualification. It's an intense course, man.
It's believable that it's such a difficult course to do, and it's hard to study, and that it's, like you said, the most difficult field to be studying in, because it looks and sounds incredibly detailed. Anytime I've ever thought about architecture, which is, again, like I say, very rare, I do almost, I suppose the reason I never give it any attention is because you feel overwhelmed by what must go into it. How can you give us a breakdown of, like, generally what we mean when we talk about architecture? Like, at what point does architecture? At what point, if someone decides that they want to build a building, at what point do they introduce an architecture? How much say does the architecture generally have in how this is done? Do they have? Does it vary? Can somebody say, I have a very specific vision, I just need you to kind of work within these boundaries? Or do they say, this is my vision, how can we make it happen? I need your creative help. And then how much of it also goes into, like, the plumbing and electrics and the things that you would imagine would require you to, like, collaborate with other people? Can you give us some kind of breakdown of architecture for the layman?
Yeah. Again, look, the reason it's so difficult is because it's not just for the reason that it's such a, you have to have such a wide grasp of creative thinking and logical pragmatic thinking, but also the fact that it's such a broad field in the sense of how it's practiced. You've got people who are qualified architects who are working on high-rise tower buildings. I mean, that's what I'm working at the moment at my practice. Major towers in London, and or community centers and commercial projects, large scale. But then you've got people who might be working on really small scale community centers, or they might be working on something a whole different scale. On top of that, you've got people who specialize in academia in architecture, so they'll be in the research side of things. Further to that, you've got people who delve out into the multidisciplinary aspects of architecture, and they'll have a interdisciplinary entrepreneurial practice where they're doing. This might sound crazy, but there's a practice called Bompus and Par, and they came from one of the best schools in architecture, and ended up making jelly. they ended up designing jelly and started a catering business, because all of the knowledge they had with 3D printing and designing structures, they were able to create these fantastic 3D modeled jellies, and they started a very successful catering company. So, and this is, by the way, this is again what makes me passionate and why I have my own podcast called Two Worlds Design, which is all about exploring the multidisciplinary potential of architecture. And I get to do what you're doing, which is you go and speak to people in their own niche and try to really investigate how they're pushing the boundaries. So, in that sense, the scope for an architect, especially today with how the digital innovation is evolving, is immense. So in the traditional sense, an architect is somebody who is able to sign off the building, essentially. I won't get into the whole bureaucracy of what is actually illegal and illegal in this country, but the only thing protected for an architect actually is the title. So you're not allowed to call yourself an architect unless you're fully qualified post your final postgrad diploma. So it takes altogether about 7 years to qualify. And only then you can then say, okay, I am the architect. And in that sense, you're taking charge of a project. You'd be dealing with all of those guys you talked about, the plumbing, the mechanical, the servicing. You'd be leading a team of consultants, essentially. And this is the traditional practice. Again, there are variations to this, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But traditionally, yes, you'd get a team of people who are in charge with how the vehicle access is going to be tackled. This is for larger projects. You've got people who are going to be dealing with how the mechanical and the plumbing is going to be dealt with, the electricity. People who are also going to be thinking about, the much more business side of things. For example, the units of the houses and how you're going to be able to sell them. So it's a massively complex process as well. When you get into practice,
you mentioned the vast difference in kind of the effort and work that goes into becoming an architect, with the remuneration. I hope I said that word correctly. That an architect gets. You put out a video.
I can show you a website quick.
Sorry.
Should I share screen?
Can you share screen?
It says I can.
Go on, try it. No virtual guests have shared a screen before. There you go.
Can you see?
Do you know what I can see? But the audience can't. But I can bring them in. Let's see how we do it. There we are.
It's just proof that architecture is regarded on many sources as the hardest subject. Can you see? It says the average amount of sleep is 5.28 hours.
Right, how many hours do you get generally?
Well, when it comes to your actual your deadlines and stuff, this is pretty accurate. So chemical engineering doesn't even get it. Look, I told you, aero astronaut.
Oh, sorry, was architecture number one?
Yeah, hardest. Because look what it's doing. List? It's comparing the pay and the effort. So it's the least rewarding, if you could put it that way. It's not a big incentive to actually get people motivated to study it. So I apologize.
What else is on the list?
Well, look, you got chemical engineering, number 2. You got aeronautical engineering, biomedical engineering. So all these STEM fields seem to be the hardest subjects, but architecture tops it. So
you released a video on your YouTube channel, which was something like, let me get it back off screen for you. You released a video on your YouTube channel that was something like the public react to how much an architect makes or something, or they guess how much an architect makes. And I wanted to watch the video. There was a great title to it, and the introduction was amazing as well. It left everything on a cliffhanger. But I chose to close the video because I thought I'd speak to you about it on the episode. I wanted to be shocked as well, and so you be Hamza Shaikh in that video, and I'm a member of the public, and let's see if we can if I can be as shocked as I'm hoping I can be for the sake of the content.
So what do you think an architect earns on average? No, this would be a fully qualified architect, so completely finished with all 7 years of education and work.
Okay, so I would have said, I would have said, I would have said somewhere close to around the 100,000 mark. And probably for some reason in my head, I'm getting 120. And
Allah.
yeah, I have high
It
hopes for
is.
you guys. So I would have said 120. I'm aware that it's also high. I'm on the higher end of guessing.
About 40, mate.
Yeah. Well, and that's the
It's-
after postgrad,
Yeah.
like fully
On
you're
average.
the architect of the project.
Yeah, on average. And it depends. It varies when it comes to like what kind of practice you're in, how much experience you've had. But this is the typical, you could even say the RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects. They're the ones who kind of govern everything. The typical salary guide. This is the pay.
Is it more common for architects to work on a contract basis and be self-employed, or to work in a firm, or can you not be self-employed and work in a contract? Do you have to be in a firm?
No. People can go off and start their own practices and practice as sole traders and freelancers.
Fine.
Yeah, completely. And this is again
Like a
why you
lawyer.
can earn way more.
Yeah.
But this is the typical trajectory that most students will take, and they'll have to jump through these hoops, and then they're able to really, once you start getting white hair, that's when you start making real money in architecture. So
How many white hairs
it's
do you
not
have?
an easy subject.
How many white hairs do you have?
I'm coming on early, mate, because I got added stresses in life.
Added stresses usually lead to a sufficient like increase of speed in hair loss as well, or mainly. There's a hormone that's released. Your hair's great, bro.
Is it?
Don't worry about it.
Alhamdulillah.
There's a let's Google it. There's a hormone that's released with stress that is like the evil cousin of testosterone. Hormone released
Toxic
with
masculinity hormone.
stress. Testosterone. Yeah, it's called like diotestosterone or something.
Wow. Sounds intense.
I'll have to find it later, but there's it's like it has the word testosterone in it, but it's not the testosterone that we all know and love. It's it's a different one, and that specific hormone speeds up stuff like hair loss, and I believe perhaps even like aging of the skin and stuff. So anyway, you are 26, I'm guessing.
Yeah, good guess.
Really?
Yeah.
I only guessed that because you said that you've been married 4 years and I'm married 5 years and I'm 27. So I thought I'm just gonna guess that he got married around the same time as me, and so that's a good guess, isn't
That's
it?
crazy. I never clocked that you're just 27.
Yeah, some people say I look old. I think it's the beard. I think the beard has added age onto me, and
No, it's more what you've established is why I'm surprised. However, I would like to think that if I didn't have such a difficult course, I'd probably be in a similar situation as you.
I think you're doing a lot better than I am. You're doing a postgrad in architecture while still running a podcast and creating content. I'm just doing a podcast, and sometimes just about. So don't worry too much.
I wanted to ask you. So how is your? I mean, this might not be public information. You don't have to answer it, but
Most of my information is public, so I'm probably
well
safe.
then. So how have you? Is your podcast self-sufficient?
That's correct, yeah.
Is it making money?
It is making money, yeah. So I work full time at Freshly Ground. We have a team of but if you mix part time and full time together, we have a team of 5. If you include hosts and people who come on shoots like on a regular basis, that goes to about 9. So we have generally a team of less than 10. But that doesn't mean that they're all on full-time salaries. People have different kind of relationships with Freshly Grounded, and actually 10. There's 10 in total. But then when we run live events, it increases quite a lot because obviously we need people in different departments. So yeah, it's like the core team who are like pretty much day to day on this is a team of 4.
Wow, that's incredible. And so I'm at that stage where I'm not really going through a podcast block, but I'm now sensing that the most important thing is to just get loads of episodes done. Is that the right way to look at it?
I don't know. The right way to look at it is that you have to find a balance between the two juggernauts, which are quality and consistency. And I lean too much on the side of consistency as opposed to quality. But it's very hard to balance the two. To have something coming out every single week, for example, and every single week having the best episode, both in terms of the conversation you have with the guest, as well as the quality visually. Perhaps like sometimes you have to shoot an episode from home, or there's been an issue with audio and stuff like that. So that's really, if you're talking about the perfect scenario, you're looking at quality and consistency. For us, we know that quality is going to be something that improves over time, hopefully, as like income increases and we can invest more into ourselves and stuff like that, and invest into people who can like take care of departments. A lot of things are still run by us. When I say we have a team of 4, I'm still the full-time production guy, really. Like when we have people come in, I'm switching cameras while I'm hosting and stuff like that. So it's a very, very small team. But for us, even though quality and consistency are the two big most important things, we realize that sometimes we might slip on one, and we're happy to slip on quality but not on consistency. And that's probably the wrong way of looking at things with most things, right? However, I feel like we have a cheat sheet or a cheat code, and that is like understanding barakah and what things have barakah in them. And we know that Allah puts barakah in deeds that are consistent even if they are small, and so we rely on that very heavily. When sometimes we put out an episode where our audio is messed up, we're using iPhone backed up audio and I have no guests, so I'm doing it by myself, and the quality of the camera is not great and the conversation is awful, but we rely on the fact that in over 5 years of podcasting, we've only ever missed a handful of Fridays. So we're quite proud of that. So I'd suppose, consistency for me is the key, but probably overall, you should definitely try and have quality and consistency.
I feel like I'm much more, I lean towards the quality side of things more than consistency.
I just think people get value from what you say. And I don't know if we always provide value.
Well, look,
we'll be here every Friday.
I think that's the important thing. You show up. And actually, I did want to talk to you about something which I think your listeners would find really interesting, and actually something I've been very focused in. And it's to do with mosques in the UK, especially. So when talking about the subject of architecture, and talking about my background, something I've always been passionate about is looking at how the design of mosques needs to change in the UK. And at times this can be a very controversial thing, but I sense that most Muslims do feel that mosques generally are kind of stuck in time.
Mm-hmm.
So before I talk about what I think and what I've learned and my, all the things that I've been doing, and I can maybe show you some drawings that I've done.
Please.
Because that's kind of the main way I've kind of built my social media presence is through my architectural drawings on Instagram. But what do you think? I mean, because you talked about the layperson's view, and as a Muslim, what do you think is the current state of masjid in the UK?
Yeah, I would definitely, especially maybe even up to a year ago, agree 100% with the statement that you just made. But I do think that I've seen one or two masajid that have started to impressed me in that realm, and that sounds like a horrible thing to say because I am nobody to be impressed, and we're talking about the house of Allah here, and so we should obviously be careful with how I say that. But I suppose if we're speaking specifically about kind of this, then I think things are slowly changing, and perhaps that's because of people like yourself. But just to name a few, there's obviously a recent masjid that was renovated in London, in Kilburn, that a lot of our followers would know of as Qalam, and they had architecture and architects come in. I was actually there yesterday speaking to them about it. They had architects, they had an engineer, and they had a building team who basically the people who renovated this mosque and who kind of took over. What they did is they did something that I find fascinating, and as simple of a concept as it is, I think none of us do enough in like all aspects of life. And they delegated tasks to people who champion those fields and who are great at those fields. And so when it came to how to manage the media and how to best distribute the lectures and the khutbahs that are going to be filmed there, and so on and so forth, they went to people who are experienced and like seasoned in media or distribution of media. And likewise, when it came to building, they did that with a building, with architects and builders. Whereas I think a lot of the times when we run a project, and I can speak about myself, definitely, I find it hard to let go of things. And so perhaps Freshly Grounded would be a lot better, a lot faster if I prioritized bringing production guys in who are seasoned in production, rather than trying to figure out my own set, figure out what camera works, and like switching the stuff myself. I always end up prioritizing speed over those things. What these guys did is they did it, I suppose, the proper way. So Qalam is an example. Another example is a masjid in Newcastle, which I think might be called Gateshead, who have recently renovated again and really taken on board like the opinion of people who they sought consultation, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. And there's a few others. So I do still, for the most part, agree with you. I do think it's changing, but it's probably because of people like yourself.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about it, because I feel like you've jumped, and I don't blame you for this, but you've jumped straight to the idea of mosques need to change in the sense of the aesthetic, the way
that is what I'm talking
mosque
about,
looks. Yes. And again, I don't blame you for this, but what's interesting is, as an architectural, designer, we seldom look at things just through the lens of aesthetics, because architecture is much more than that. Much more than that. People don't know that. The lay people don't usually clock that. And there's a lot more in the sense of how the space makes you feel, how the space makes you behave, and all the kind of the deeper aspects that you relate to your sensory perception in that space. And the memories tied to that space, the identity that space represents is a massive thing. And it's a thing that I think as Muslims in Britain, we get too lost in, actually. And I think I'm going to start to talk about what actually the fundamental, if you go back to the foundations of Islam, and, the foundations of, arguably the first mosque in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, what that mosque was like, and then try to compare that to what people are trying to build today, and just look at the massive discrepancy there and say, what's going on? Why are we building stuff with giant golden domes and green minarets straight out of, a village in Pakistan, when the mosques in its purest form was something that was clad with mud and palm leaves for a roof, and was a social space for people to come into and to talk and to kind of, form a community. So there's so many questions there that I've been asking for a number of years. I haven't actually got to work on a mosque from start to end, but I've been, for example, there's a guy called Shahid Salim, who's probably the leading architect in the UK when it comes to redefining what we think of as British mosques.
Okay.
And he's someone.
Did you have him on your podcast?
Yes, he was first episode.
Yeah, I saw that.
And
I saw a snippet of that.
yeah, that's a really fascinating one because we went through the foundations of where the slight disjunct is, and I guess you could say two different schools of thought. One is the new generation, myself, who, by the way, I seem to be less conservative or less traditionally minded when it comes to, I guess, identity politics, especially in Islam, which is, I think it's a rather new thing to see people who are looking for a more, you know, because again, this sounds very scary to a lot of people, but to look for a type of Islam that is more accepting of Western life, and again, that's something that a lot of people have a lot of hesitance, but it's something that a lot of scholars are talking about. It's something that's always been in the discourse since Muslim migrants moved to the UK. How do we balance being part of a country that is Western, but holding on to what we think is Islam and not confusing that? Because we often hear, don't we? Is it Islam you're practicing here, or is this some sort of cultural, uh, you know, something that's a cultural version of Islam that you're practicing? So this debate comes into architecture as well, which is, should our mosques retain these typical iconography, these symbols of Arab and Ottoman kind of design language of domes and minarets, or should we be looking to um, create mosques and spaces that are open to all, but hold on to the fundamentals and foundations?
Seems like a conversation that's above my grade of knowledge from an Islamic perspective.
It would be very
I wonder.
interesting
The
to have
reason I
a
say that is
scholar
because I
involved.
wonder if there are, and again, I don't know. I'm sure perhaps you know better, being someone who's clearly looked into the architecture of mosques. But I don't know if there is, if there are like Islamic evidences for having mosques in a certain, just obviously, despite the fact that, like you rightly mentioned, like, we can look at history and say that mosques have been very simple, but still I don't know anything about the like specific rulings on things like, for example, domes and minarets. I don't even know if that's a discussion that's ever been had. I have no knowledge.
There's nothing. There's
Okay.
nothing on it. As you know, I'm no scholar, but I've definitely looked into it enough. I'm in how do you say it? I've been able to talk to people much more knowledgeable than me,
Fine.
and
Okay.
you know, it almost doesn't even need that deeper level of, oh, should we try and find some level of jurisprudence to back up this argument?
Sure.
Just look at it from a common sense perspective. Those things actually don't even come from Arab or Ottoman cultures. They come from Roman and Byzantine cultures. Muslims didn't invent the dome or the minaret. They just
Of
adapted
course.
it to their own Eastern language, and suddenly it's stuck. And it was an expression of of Ottoman rule, essentially. And this cultural kind of sticking point has never left the Muslims. And as a result of migrants coming into the UK, they needed something to hold on to. They needed cultural centers that expressed their outer identity as Eastern people. They needed to stamp stuff with their domes and their minarets. These are our forefathers, right? That was the way of them having their own. And so these
Okay.
things stuck. And I fear that this has actually become being seen to be like, and I think this extends to, again, it would be great to have a scholar in on this discussion, because again, it draws many parallels with I think the state of the Muslims as well, and all the tensions that are there. If you think there are, I think there are. Um, yeah, with regards to what is obligatory, what is there for us to look at. People often will say, if you talk about the word innovate, you suddenly think of bid'ah, but innovate actually has very positive
Of
connotations.
course.
If you come away from what is the very bad connotation in Islam of
Yeah.
bid'ah, which is very clearly something which looks to uproot something that is the truth based on the Quran and the Hadith. That's a very different thing to saying, let's be innovative as Muslims and look at ways to get the truth out there more.
Yeah, I think everybody's, or like at least everybody I know I've spoken to is in line with that. I don't think there's much of a, perhaps very early on, you'd hear if somebody says the word innovate, like it'll be a scary word. But I think now we all have an understanding of where innovation is bad and where you can innovate in terms of like technology and so on and so forth.
Do you know what my fear is, man? And because I've been through the whole journey of super non-practicing to the extreme levels, to then being extremely practicing to levels where, I was, let's just say, ignoring other parts of my life, and it was not the right way to kind of be. And so I've been through that whole journey, and I feel like I've found balance now, alhamdulillah. But what I feel like people get too bogged down with things that are way out of their league. And you kind of mentioned that with like, your production and all these other things. And, we draw parallels with architecture. It's like, I feel like Muslims try to be these kind of like Google scholars, and they try to talk about jurisprudence, and they try to talk about fiqh, and they hear something, they might hear a hadith, and suddenly they think that they've heard a fact, and they might not even know, all of the things that come with being a muhaddith and being able to actually analyze and interpret hadith. It's a relatively, as far as I understand, it's a relatively new thing in the West to bring the Islamic tradition and to try and make sense of it. And we are Westerners, we don't have the mammoth of knowledge of Arabic, and well, at least I don't, and we don't have the capacity to really delve into these things, which only qualified scholars, I think, are able to jump into. So I think that extends into the mind frame of how people think about mosques as well.
Okay, so we've kind of lost our path here. Where I was intrigued, but we never finished off, I suppose the point was how architecture can encourage emotions and feeling in a building, or like in this case a mosque. And I'm really intrigued by that. Like what kind of things in the world of architecture could we see more of in mosques to help, for example, that mindset, or to help us best use mosques for worship in a way that, like we are saying, is not innovative bad, but innovative for in a helpful way?
Well, I think that there's the whole in architecture. There's a dichotomy of looking at things either in a completely functional way, or to look at things in a completely aesthetic or ornamental way. And I think again there needs to be a balance there as well. So right now our mosques usually are either one way or the other, and you could look at them in a completely different way depending on again how you look at it. So right now if you walk into a mosque, it's a very dry and very functional space, which some people could argue is actually a good thing, right? You go into a mosque, it's just what your job is, you get your head down to do sujood, and that's it, you leave. But if you look at the way some of these new mosques are emerging, and they really because they've got skilled designers coming in there, they really emphasize as I said, these sensory perceptions where they might have have you ever walked into a church?
Yes.
Okay, so when you walk into a church, you're instantly in awe, instantly, because the way that churches are designed is the ceilings are all the way up to the sky. So instantly, as you walk in, your head goes up, and you suddenly seem to already be in that position of of being able to take in some sort of revelatory message, because you're looking up to the skies for something, and then you look around you and it's just space. It's just space all around you. The stone walls that surround you as well make you feel like we're almost embedded within Earth. There was a high level of design thinking that went into churches that I don't think ever happened with mosque design, especially in the West. And you see it to some level when you go to Dubai, you go to like the Blue Mosque and all these things. It's there, but nowhere near as much. And we definitely don't make as much use of that in contemporary architecture. Instead, you walk into a Sheikh Zayed mosque and you'll do that, but you're distracted by the gold plating and the platinum chandelier and the diamond bezels. So there's so much there to try and improve when it comes to mosque design. But as I said to you, I'm actually more interested in the program, or let's just say the non-aesthetic side of mosque design. So I just gave you an example of how you could change some level of aesthetics to give you more of a sensory perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you changed a mosque, or if you created a mosque where maybe there was a coffee shop on level 1 that had an overlooking kind of mezzanine that looked down onto the prayer space, and there was a social space there as well, where people could go and have a kind of a fun time, and the mosque had a library, and the library was positioned in a way that it felt central to the mosque's program, where it almost put the emphasis on education and being enlightened, where there was maybe there was a media room where you could screen things. So there's so many things about mosque design that I think, from a programmatic point of view, could bring flourishment for the Muslims in this country.
Yeah, I think that's why I find it hard to have these discussions, because I think that a huge element of it is based on us understanding knowledge, which I personally, for me, I know that I'm not equipped with. For example, if we're speaking about mosques and we're saying that, for example, mosques should have like cafeterias and so on and so forth.
Not all of them.
Sorry?
I wouldn't say all of them. I would say that's an example of like one.
An example, right? But of course, not all of them. But we do have to then, because we can't avoid it, because we do have a religion that's based on evidences, and if we stray from those evidences, we're only gonna get lost in ourselves, right? And so then we do have to have the discussion of like the first thing that pops into my mind is buying and selling in mosques, right? Something that is that we have to look into the permissibility of, because we know that from my very limited knowledge, you can't buy and sell in mosques. However, if then all of a sudden it's not a mosque and you're talking about an Islamic center, then of course the Islamic center itself could within it have a mosque, which by the way is simply for like worship, and there's nothing like a cafeteria and stuff in there. But the Islamic center as a whole could have a coffee shop, media center, and stuff like that. And actually, some of the mosques that I just mentioned prior are like either have implemented that or do, and I think it is an amazing idea. I've been to a mosque myself that has a cafeteria at the front, and I thought it was an amazing feature. But my point is, I find it hard to have these discussions, not because I want to always sit on the fence and make sure I don't offend anybody, but because I do feel like there's a definite lack of presence of someone who could say, okay, well then if you're talking about that, it's fine. From an architectural perspective, yes, that would be great. But by the way, that can't be a mosque. It can be an Islamic center, which is like a madrasa and stuff like that, and then it could have within it have a mosque, and in that mosque there's and it becomes really like what's the word, like we're talking about semantics here, and I find those discussions tough, because you probably are coming from like you are coming from clearly such an amazing perspective, which I again agree with all of your points, but you can't help but then it's like a discussion of semantics, and those discussions I think are too perhaps overwhelming for me, perhaps due to my lack of intellect. I don't know, but do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, but I think there's a sense of apprehension in you in hearing ideas that are seemingly out of the box, which again,
the reason I would disagree with that is because I said I've been to Islamic centers that have a cafe, and I love it, and have media centers and stuff like that. So, and I would hope that I'm not apprehensive with
I don't think it's a bad thing to be apprehensive. I think it's going to be completely normal. People don't like change, and especially when it comes to things related to Deen, and things aren't very clear about what can or can't be done. People have that fear. Which, by the way, my response to what you were saying was going to be, I, I I'm impressed that you came to that conclusion about semantics, because it's taken me a long time to come to that conclusion myself, which is, what if I don't even need to say that I need to design a mosque, and I'm
Yeah.
designing some other type of spiritual
Sense.
center, even though I
Yeah.
don't like that word spiritual, because
Of
it
course.
denotes it suggests that there's a line between your lived reality and your spiritual reality, which I don't think there is. But yeah, you're right, and at the same time, there does need to be somebody qualified when it comes to, you know, the real kind of the knowledge and experience of how mosques should work from a functional point of view, from the ulama point of view. There does need to be someone in that process, and that the architect's scope does cover that. Although we have to jump into various roles, we don't claim to be experts in one. We're kind of jack of all trades architects. So I would, if I ever did take on a project like that, where there was something quite drastic being proposed, you would want to get a consultant in.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I definitely don't want to close down what you're like shut down what you're saying, because I think there's like great benefit in doing what I can't remember the name of the term. I want to say something like open sky thinking, or perhaps you know the term better than me. It's something along the lines of that, but where you can almost say, okay, if we were to have no boundaries, and if nothing was an issue, including finances and anything else, so
Yeah.
there's no boundaries, and I wanted to create X, how would I create it? And then you scale down. And I think that it seems like you're great at doing that. And I would hate to ever be the guy who like shuts down those concepts. I think but I think you're right. Perhaps it is apprehension when it comes to Islamic discussion.
Yeah.
There's naturally a lot of apprehension. I think you're right. What
Yeah,
is the
man.
name of that type of thinking? Let me find out.
Well, I would say speculative thinking, and at the same time, that is something which I think is so crucial to architecture. And I don't know if you're getting my screen share, but thought I'd quickly show you some
Yeah, let me open it up. I think
examples
it
of
is
it.
blue sky thinking. It says
Oh,
blue
nice.
sky thinking is supposed to be optimistic, non-judgmental, and intended to generate ideas, while not necessarily realistic. Might define ideas or goals at higher standards. It's ghastly cliche. It's a ghastly cliche whose meaning is opaque. What? Blue sky thinking, anyway, is what I was
Blue
talking
sky.
about. Let me open up your screen share so people can see it. There you go. Talk us through what you're showing us.
Yeah, so I mean, this is blue sky thinking, isn't it? This is exactly what we're trained to do in architecture school, to be able to look at the boundless
This is amazing. Did you draw
possibilities.
this?
Yeah.
Oh my
So
god.
this is just an example of how you can think through your drawing and express these ideas that hopefully will encourage people to think slightly outside the box. But there's so much depth to these kind of ideas that sometimes you can't explain it through words. You have to explain it through a drawing. So, I've started to bring in things here that are very crucial to, the way British mosques are. So, you can see this is an example of what you would see in a typical mosque, where it's usually some sort of house converted or some pub that's converted and has a very
Yeah.
domestic feel. But
Mhm.
then I've started to introduce ways of that breaking apart and becoming this mega mosque, which you see everywhere else, almost this giant dystopic dome with mechanical. And the idea that I've brought in here with the mechanical side of things is to suggest that mosques need to be productive. They need to have an element of something of value being produced, whether that's a metaphorical sense or whether that's something literally. And you talked about things that are
This is
buying and
amazing,
selling.
by the way.
I appreciate that, man. You talked about buying and selling, and I didn't actually. I've never heard that before, and I also think, buying and selling is you know, mosques usually sell books, and they have like things that they can buy and sell that I've seen before. So,
Of course, and as
that's
a vibe, if you go to London Central Mosque, there's a shop there. You're right. I think that's why I said that it's an issue of semantics, because I suppose which I don't know, is what is classed as a mosque. Is it simply the area in which, for example, people pray, or is it the whole building, right? But I think that's what I'm talking about, is the fact that it could be an issue of semantics, or it could be something that's debated amongst the scholars to such an extent that I feel incredibly shy to speak about on a public platform. I think that's what it is. Do you know what I mean? But then I don't like shutting down blue sky thinking, which is why I'm like. By the way, can I just say this drawing is amazing. And I was going to ask you about your drawings, because I saw in one of your vlogs that you draw on the train. But do you get where I'm coming from?
100%. And I think it's summarized in this, if I can read this caption.
Please.
So I said, a productive mosque, and that's the title of this drawing. It sounds controversial to suggest that places of worship need to drastically change. But as communities and identities evolve in a mixing pot like Britain, so too will their cultural iconography. And that means, the things that they choose to externalize. So for those who don't know, there is a generational tension within British Muslim communities. This tension is generally between the elder boomers and the younger millennial/Gen Y demographic. That tension is one integrally tied to Britishness and the boomers' fear of losing their traditional/cultural vernacular. Vernacular is, by the way, just means the kind of the way things have been done for the previous part of history by non-skilled designers. So this type of pub renovation, domestic renovation of mosques is a typical British vernacular. Anyway, in this case, that would be their ancestral subcontinental symbolism. So interestingly, the elder generation's worries are usually tied to their fear of losing orthodoxy. Now, this is a key point, Faisal. So do you get that? I said that
I understand.
elder generation's worries are usually tied to their fear of losing orthodoxy. But this fear has led to a deeper understanding of orthodoxy among new thinkers. So one which can be very British and not just Eastern. This will result in a drastic shift in how sacred architecture will be designed. We are already seeing its emergence. So these are all random design ideas for new ways of looking at mosques. So I won't read all of these, but these are just, I'll quickly go through them. Oh, by the way, I think there's close-ups of this drawing.
How come you decided to go for a dome?
Well, again, I'm very keen on this concept of thinking through drawing. So although I try to not show my own preferences in my drawing, because I look at these as like research tools. So in that previous drawing that had a dome, I was just exploring what is already out there and trying to show that discrepancy I mentioned in the caption of, are we going towards the dome way of thinking, or are we going towards another way of showing what is British Muslim identity in the UK?
Sure.
This is rather drastic, and maybe people will be even more uncomfortable with this, but this is if you combined a church, a mosque, and a synagogue in one.
Well, that is controversial.
Yeah, 100%. But as you said, the blue sky thinking, I'm looking at this from a perspective of, let's just throw out there whatever is possible and look at ways in which maybe positive ideas can come from it. But this, as you say, would probably not be called a mosque, because I believe there's going to be a lot more difficulties in trying to bring other worshippers into a single worship space, from a jurisprudence perspective for sure as well. But
are you drawing something that like a multi-purpose building where worshippers of different faiths can come in and all individually worship?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredibly controversial.
Yeah, I know it is. But then again, these are ideas, they're nothing more. And, you might have an idea that's expressed that actually makes you more convinced of your apprehension. And that is then even more useful as a research tool.
Wow, that is an amazing way of thinking. That's true. That's very true.
Well, it's the way that I think academics, not to say I'm an academic, even though to some degree I am in some ways, but it's the role of the academic is to explore these things and to come up with ways in which people can expand their thinking. So, this would be regarded as some, maybe this would be an Abrahamic sort of temple of some sort, which, I don't think it would be very realistic, but it doesn't hurt to explore them. And this is another idea of a mosque, more looking at the aesthetic qualities.
What's
Slightly
that?
crazy.
What's the legs and stuff?
Again, this is just exploring. So I've just written high tech meets traditional vernacular. So my recent studies have been proven to be a little controversial. So I thought I'd tone it down with something less complex. So this is just.
What was the reaction of your other stuff?
Oh, there's loads of comments. Probably, yeah. So it's really interesting because people involved in architecture are usually quite switched on, and they know their stuff. So I won't get into it, but yeah, there's like a 50-50 split if I was to predict how people feel about looking at new ways of thinking about
Do you
worship space.
Do you understand why? Or do you? Sorry, not understand. That's very patronizing. Can you appreciate why something like this can make people feel uncomfortable?
Oh, of course.
But your response in saying that, your response, I think, was amazing in saying that it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that you agree with, or and perhaps it might actually deepen your apprehension.
Yeah, only through really exploring and thinking through these ideas are you able to really understand why you think the way you think. And I think that's been something I've been exploring with my own understanding of Islam as well, and what my parents told me was Islam. And then when I later realized and started researching and studying and listening to following scholars and things like that, your understanding evolves and it changes. And as I said, these are research tools, and I have no problem in making people slightly uncomfortable, because I feel like that's the role of people who are trying to push the limits and trying to find innovative outcomes. And in some ways, you doing a podcast is also a way of putting out ideas that might not be, that might be on the fringe, in order to learn more. So that's the way I look at these drawings, and that's the way I look at pretty much everything I do. Is it's a way of understanding things to a much deeper level. And people have looked at this, and even I've started to learn much more. And again, like you said, I've become more convinced about certain apprehensions. But at the same time, I've also realized, wait a minute, is that something that is part of Islam, or is that something that we are just doing because it's a cultural tradition, or it's something we've been told to do by our parents? And in that way, you're actually doing more of a disservice to your religion than anything else. So I have a lot of mosque exploration drawings. This one's crazy, even ties in.
We can't see your screen anymore. Sorry, I'll throw it back to us two.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, if people want to check that, they can just go to my Instagram.
Which is
Hamza Shaikh. It's just hamzashaikh.design.
So let's move away from architecture for a second and get you uncomfortable.
Yalla.
How's dad life? How is it being a young dad?
Oh, you know what? I'm gonna just say, you know what? It's made me more focused. It's made me more motivated. It's made me more switched on. I think you become much more wary of the time you have and the time you don't have, which is something I never really was tuned into before. You're also forced to have a good work-life balance. So, I feel like having a child and having a family is an essential thing in a man's life. And, it'd be good to get a woman's perspective and maybe hear a woman say it's essential part to a woman's life. But from my perspective, yeah, it's been a blessing, man. It's been difficult. I think that doesn't need to be said. But yeah, what about you? How do you find it?
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it perfectly. The work-life balance, the focus, the time.
And you got two.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that you mentioned the time thing, and you do realize when you have a child how much time you had and how much time you have, and it makes you realize they shouldn't waste time. But it's amazing because when you have that first child, you think, I had all this time before, and now I don't have time to do some of the perhaps extracurricular stuff that I would have wanted to do, or like hobbies and stuff. But then when you have two, that's when you realize, wow, when I had one, I had a lot of time. So I would say take advantage even of the time you have now, but you have a lot. Think about all those times that your son's napping. Think about all those times that somebody's taken him out, whether your wife's taken him out or whether the grandparents are taking him out. When you have two, bro, a nice break is your wife taking one of them out and you only have to deal with one. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, because you're doing two at the same time. So it changes. Like now, if for example, like the grandparents were to take one of our sons, it's like, oh, like we got all this time. Like we could go out and just take one child out, right? Or like we could do all of these things that are harder to do with two children. And I can't even remember life with none. So even like now, like even things like holidays, bro. Like I think to myself, why did I never take like a 2-month holiday? You know what I mean? Like despite obviously like when we didn't have kids, we could have literally said, let's go away for 2 months. And let's do it in a way where we can book an apartment somewhere where we've got high speed internet, so I can continue my work and work's not affected. So there's no issue there. And obviously, yes, it's going to be costly, but holidays are. So assuming you're willing to pay the cost of going on holiday, things like that. I'm sure if I said to you now, go take a 2-month holiday. Let's say, for example, your work was all virtual, you didn't have to attend. You'd say, but this can be very difficult with a kid. So that's how you start thinking when you have two, I guess. I've been thinking about this recently. I've been thinking, can I take a really long... And I hate holidays. But I think one of the reasons I don't like holidays is probably because the fact that you have to adjust so much and then you're back. I don't know. So I was thinking, would it work? I was trying to think about the ways I could reduce my stress. I know a lot of people try and reduce stress through taking holidays, which I haven't found the benefit of. But I thought maybe if I take like a really long one, and I thought, do you think it's possible to take 2 small kids and your wife or like a really long holiday? So I've been trying to think about that, but, all in the name of trying to reduce stress, which actually sounds like quite a stressful task.
It's funny,
but
man.
Anyway, I digress.
I was going to say though, it's amazing how we adapt though, isn't it?
It is.
Because the way you're describing it, it's just like I'm having that conversation with people who have no kids. Like, yeah, mate, trust me, when you have a kid, it's this and that, and then, make the most of your time, and
Go on holiday.
They're like, yeah, and they're like, oh, well, how do you do it with that amount of sleep? And you're like, well, you just adapt. And then you're having that conversation with me, but you got 2 kids. It's subhanAllah. And I think
you can't.
This is worth saying as well. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That young men of our demographic as well are very hesitant to start a family. I would say okay. Right now, the generation now, I feel like they're very hesitant to start a family because they sense that, it's going to be massively difficult. I think a lot of that has to do with, how the traditional family structure is also quite different nowadays as well. But I think there's some optimism there, isn't it? That you do adapt at the end of the day.
You do adapt. And what you were saying about speaking to people who have no kids and advising them, I think that calls to the notion of just never knowing a situation until you're in it. You can tell someone until you're blue in the face, make the most of your time. And people used to tell me before we had kids, you know, enjoy marriage and go away and stuff like that, and before, while you don't have kids. But when the grass is always green on the other side. You think, well, it would be amazing to have kids. So I suppose that comes down to gratefulness, looking at people below you, all these things that prophetically we're told to practice in life. What am I grateful for? I'm grateful for the fact that I have a spouse that I can travel with. I'm grateful for the fact that we have this free time. And if you look at people below you, there's people who are struggling, perhaps to have a spouse and that kind of way of thinking, though it sounds mean, is a prophetic way of thinking, isn't it? To be grateful, to increase your gratefulness. So it's hard though. I think empathy is an incredibly difficult trait because it kind of comes in empathy, doesn't it? You have to try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I think empathy is a really difficult trait, and I think that a lot of us speak of empathy and maybe even like assume we are good at it or we have it, when actually we struggle with empathy. I struggle massively with empathy.
Same, man. Did you come from a family of a lot of boys?
No, it was evenly split.
Oh, okay. Because I felt like mine was down to the fact that I was one of 3 brothers, and my mum's a pretty macho woman. So, you know, when I got married,
We should be happy with you saying that.
huh?
We should be happy with you saying that to hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, oh wow, there's that many people listening. No, you know, when I say macho, I mean like she's a strong woman, man. She went through a lot when she was young. She's the strongest person I know in the world for sure.
You saved yourself.
So that's what I mean by macho, yeah. So in that sense, yeah, when I got married, I was like, I suddenly had to deal with these emotions, and I was like, I don't know how to deal with this. So yeah, I know exactly how you feel. If you feel that way.
Yeah. How did you adapt those parts of your character? What did you struggle with that you perhaps didn't expect?
When you're a kid and you're dealing with other boys and you're in an ultra competitive environment, you're only looking at solutions. You're only looking at things in black and white. You're only looking at things as competition in a way. But and I think that's the masculine character as well, to be very like black and white with everything, and to be, you know, we have to find a solution to everything. It's never just about, you know, maybe venting emotions, things like that. So for me, like just being able to let go of, okay, there needs to be an outcome, or there needs to be a solution, or there needs to be, you know, a learning point, or there needs to be something at the end of it. Was just a massive.
It's like
Yeah.
It's like you're echoing my thoughts. Like I've been through the exact same thing. It's amazing.
This is it, man. And I feel like it brings you closer to God as well, because at the end of the day, you think about, when you talk about the prophetic lessons, you think about how the Prophet ﷺ was to his wives and to people. You know, it was an incredibly empathetic character, and
yeah, of course.
That's what makes a good leader. A good leader is someone who leads from the front. He joins his people. He goes out and does it with the people. But somebody who sits around and just tells people what's right and what's wrong, that he was never like that. And that's, you know, I think that actually comes from a very traditional, dare I say it, kind of, you know, South Asian mind frame, to be very authoritative and to almost not take into account, you know, the feminine point of view at times and the feminine energy, which is something, yeah, I've definitely been able to refine.
It's good that you're open to adjusting.
Yeah,
Those things.
I like change.
Yeah, I hate change.
Really?
Yeah, I don't.
Have
think
you always been practicing? If you are
No.
practicing, no. So there was a change there then.
Yeah, that's true.
What was that like?
I suppose I hate change more on a micro level though. It's weird because I'm never averse to change on a macro level. I can make very big decisions very easily, and I struggle to make small decisions that will change. I can make a decision or I say I can. I don't think I would struggle to make a decision to, for example, like move house, which is a big decision. It's a macro decision, isn't it? But I would struggle with change if it came to changing how we shoot the intro of our episodes, which is completely erratic and like anyway, it doesn't even have a structure. But or who edits the episodes, or usually these small things. I'm just kind of relating it to work, but
Would you say you're an all or nothing kind of guy?
I don't know.
I feel like I am like that, and I sense that you are as well. It's the idea that if you're going to do something, you're going to do it to 100%, maybe even more, metaphorically
Perhaps.
speaking. Or if you're not going to, if you're not going to do it to its highest level, you're just not going to do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I feel
Give
like
me an
that kind
example
of
of
relates.
a way when you've done that.
I mean, I've done that just through, for example, even Dean becoming practicing. I did that when I was I went from minus 100 to 100, and then also with my academics and my studies, like I was failing. I almost failed. I pretty much failed my first year of uni, and then when I switched everything in sort of second year of uni, I turned everything around. It took a massive toll on me, but I've always been that kind of guy, 0 to 100, or all or nothing. I've changed that now, I believe, but that's something I don't think you can completely get rid of as a person.
Yeah, I don't think you can get rid of that as a person, but you just don't strike me because the connotations I get with that kind of individual is like I mentioned earlier, someone who's erratic, and you don't strike me as that. You strike me incredibly balanced. With
I think I've become more balanced.
Sorry?
I think I've become more balanced.
Okay,
But I'll give you an example.
Through marriage and children and Dean?
Yeah, definitely. But I'll give you an example, yeah.
How do
So
you
I
deal
was
with
walking down
stress?
the street. Stress? What kind of stress?
Okay. The reason I would say stress and I wouldn't refine it down to a type of stress because I want to know how you deal with stress in and of itself. Not if I told you a way, then you would base your answer on that scenario. So if I was say work stress, you would say, well, I'd come home and when I'm around my child, I feel relaxed. Or if I was say stress at home, you would say I'd go for a walk outside the house, I'd leave the house. And I don't want that kind of answer. I want to know. I'm asking for advice, a productive answer as to stress in general, the emotion of going through stress, regardless of what the external is. The emotion is always the same. The hormones that are released through stress are always the same. Stress affects your gut, it affects your heart. You have a higher chance of a heart attack when you're going through stress. You age quicker. It affects your immune system. It weakens your immune system, and all of those things happen with stress, and it's regardless of the external factors of that stress. So stress as an emotion, what do you do?
I don't think there's anything to do instantaneously, but I think it takes reflecting. And I think one way of looking at this is stress is a symptom of an imbalance. At least that's the way I understand it. So if you're feeling stressed, it means something is imbalanced. And if it's something that is external to you, i.e. it's not in your control, and it's something that, I don't know, a loved one has died, I would still regard that as an imbalance. But that's an imbalance where you can't really do anything about it. And the chances are that balance will eventually be achieved once you can deal with it. So maybe there is a level of you actually dealing with something that's external as well. But from a day-to-day level, like let's say you had a massive argument with your wife and stress levels are off the chain because you're just, everything is just in it's not a nice feeling if you're having an argument with your loved one, and that can really mess things up. And that's, I guess, sometimes where I get stressed out. So in that sense, I instantly sense there's an imbalance. There's something that I need to do. There's something that maybe she needs to do, but my priority is me. That there needs to be something that brings it back to the middle, something that brings it back to equilibrium. Is it something that I need to accept? Is it something that I need to go and address? Is it a behavior I need to change? And usually what I find is stress is usually my own self-sabotaging something. So I might be stressed because I'm staying up at 12 until like 11 a.m., 12 a.m. because I have a serotonin deficiency in needing to go and get something out there on my YouTube channel. So I'll do it late at night, and then I'll do that for 4 nights in a row. My son's having bad sleep. I start having an argument with my wife, and suddenly I'm like, I'm stressed. But that's a symptom of something you're doing slightly wrong.
So
You
setting
need to
up
go and
habits
address that
and
balance.
being organized in advance to reduce the chances of having compound stress.
Yeah, I think balance. I think the answer to stress is balance. I think you can't avoid stress. It's always going to be a fluctuating thing. It's always going to be, you're going to be stressing out loads, and you're going to be stressing out here, but you need to always try and bring it back to the center. The dangerous thing is when you're in a state of depression because you've been in stress mode for so long and you haven't addressed the issues to come back to the balance. That's something therapy would help with. But what is therapy? Therapy is trying to go and troubleshoot and find areas of imbalances. It can even be an area of imbalance that is all the way down to your childhood affiliation with your parents or something. So I think it's always an internal reflection point, and it might be a cliche answer, but salah is an amazing way of dealing with stress, I think, because it trains you to come back into that mind frame of being focused on what's going on your internals, and having a ritual which separates you from the outside world. If you just deconstruct what salah is as an experiential process, something so hard to really get right. Salah is such a difficult thing to perfect, at least from my experience. I'm on a daily basis. I'm figuring out ways I can try to improve it, and I'm lacking, or I need to go back. So like, just the idea of you saying, okay, I need to focus on one area, and then you're reciting verses that you have to ponder over. You have to try and understand what you're saying. You go into physical motions. Everything is about center and balance. Everything's symmetrical. It's an incredible thing that, even pre-Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is a thing. Jesus used to prostrate his head. Balance. I would summarize it as balance. What about you? How do you deal with stress?
I guess I'm on a journey of asking people how they deal with stress, so I can try and take from their answers things that I can put in my toolbox and take out when I need it. I think that one of the best answers I feel like I've had is that stress is amplified by overthinking, and so one of the things is to sometimes just to like keep it stepping, like move on from that thought. As simple as it sounds, it related to me a lot, I guess, because I think stress, like I said, it like compounds when you add when you're thinking about it. Then you're stressing over the fact that you're stressing, and the way out of that is to simply stop thinking about it, that thing.
But that's what salah does. Well, that's
Of
what salah
course.
should do.
Yeah.
Salah's supposed to break thinking. And
Yeah.
100%, whoever gave you the answer, that's a brilliant answer. Because yes, the thinking mind is. I don't know if have you ever heard of Eckhart Tolle?
No.
You need to listen to that guy. I'm gonna drop you a link or drop you some things.
Okay.
I've never seen a human being who emanates humility and presence to the level of this creature. And he's like this little cute old man, like wears these vest jumpers, and he's like, he doesn't like people clapping. He's just, you know, you gotta. He's like the highest authority on these topics, I think, when it comes to like talking about, you know, the overthinking mind and how to deal with everything that comes from that.
Do you read much? It sounds like you're so busy with having a full-time job and then content creating and podcasting and doing a postgrad, being a father and a husband, all of which you seem to, Allah Mubarak, be balancing quite well. So do you get time for things like reading or sport?
Well, I have to read at the moment. I have to. I'm doing
outside of your studies.
I mean, I read a really awesome fictional book a few months ago. So yeah, I do, and I find time for that. For example, if I'm on the train, because I commute to work, then I can listen to something or I can read something. So I do end up finding time. I'm just very cautious with my time, I think. So like with football, like you just mentioned football. Like I've recently started playing football as well after work.
You play
I do find the time.
Your worked buddies. That's nice.
Yeah.
5-a-side?
You got to have the balance, innit? Yeah. Yeah. 5-a-side, sometimes 4. Depending on who's up for it. Yeah. Yeah, man.
It's interesting speaking to you, man. It's lovely hearing like what goes on in your mind, in the mind of a young professional who has so many different things going on, seems to balance them very well, but also is clearly like an advanced thinker, clearly an academic. I feel out of my depth in conversation with you, to be honest. So it's very interesting hearing, listening to you, and like you mentioned earlier, kind of drawing parallels. Yeah, it's been fun. It's left me with things to think about. It's been good. I'm looking forward to perhaps doing it again in person.
Yeah, man, I'd love that. I think we get a lot more out of conversation when you talk in person, and there's so many things to talk about.
How amazing is technology, though? The fact that we've been able to have conversation for an hour and a half and feel all of the emotions of conversation, agree on things, disagree on things, question each other on things, and yet you're in the comfort of your home in front of your computer, and I'm in somewhat comfort of my studio, bit of discomfort because I know that I've now got to go out in and get home. I can't just go straight into my bed. But still, alhamdulillah. Technology is an amazing thing, isn't it?
It's amazing, man. You know, this might be a really weird way of closing off the conversation, and I don't know if I'm going to regret saying this, but you know, we're talking about all these things about innovation, technology, and you know, thinking about things outside the box. And I always thought, I don't know, maybe this is a weird thought to have and a weird place to talk about it.
Say it, and if it's we can always cut it out. It's not enough. Yeah.
Well, look, I've been starting to wonder this for a while now, and it's like, what, you know, people like to talk about the Prophet ﷺ, and they think they have him all figured out when they read some hadith and whatnot. But sometimes I wonder, what would he be like if he was in today's world and he had access to these things, like a phone, the internet, people on a mass scale? What would he be doing? Would he be the guy who walks around the ends or something? Or would he be someone who's like leading socioeconomic matters? Would he be someone who's innovating and forming alliances and dominating the way he dominated the time he was in? And it's like, what would he be? Who would he be affiliating himself with? And I know it's such a.
Do you not feel like we know the answers to these questions through like through things like knowing that Islam is timeless, and then like seeing the seerah and understanding that he had such a big impact on stuff like social economic matters, seeing like the like seeing like the different spaces in which he sallallahu alaihi wasallam had leadership in, and then like different like principles in Islam lead us to understanding like perhaps because how perhaps he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would deal with these things, because as Muslims ourselves, what we're basically trying to do is live our life here according to how how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would live his life, and we don't know, for example, how he would interact with a mobile phone, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But what we do know is principles like, for example, that like the chances of harm outweigh the potential of good, and potentially taking that, so that's a principle that's been packaged for us, for example, and then like applying that principle to, like, for example, mobile phones, and saying, okay, if I have a smartphone, there's a small chance that I could, for example, come across things that are damaging to my iman, and that outweighs like the good I could do with that phone, but then obviously these principles have to be looked up on, again, I sound like a broken record, but like a scholarly level, because as you mentioned earlier, there's fiqh matters to all of these things that lay people like myself can't make the decision on. But I'm saying, let's say, for example, there's a person who is, a great scholar, someone who's studied, understands the seerah to an incredibly advanced level, and also understands the Islamic sciences at an advanced level, could say, not this is how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would live, because like he it was always written the time that he was going to come, and his mission, when his mission would have been completed, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But through those principles, we can understand how life should be lived. Because I go back to my original point of, if we here today in the 21st century are Muslims with laptops, with TVs and sofas and cars, we are just trying to be as close to the sunnah as possible, aren't we?
Yeah, man. I think you're right. I think the thing that makes me intrigued about all of that is, when we like to talk about da'wah, right? And whether that should be a fundamental priority for everyone before, you're even talking about your own internal state, that's a question to be debated, I guess. But if you ask a layperson, anyone right now, non-Muslim, about, what do they think about Islam, what comes to their head, comes to their mind, usually it's not going to be a very positive thing, as far as I've experienced. And part of me thinks, like, if the Prophet ﷺ was here, and if he was able, we talk about the seerah, right? You just talked about the seerah and the sunnah, so the spirit of the Prophet, what is the spirit of the Prophet? And I think about this in how it extends to what I do with architecture as well, and everything else in relation to what is the message you're putting out there, and what is the end result of all the innovations you might be looking at. And the way I look at it is like, what are we actually doing when it comes to da'wah? Like, for me, I feel like da'wah needs to be approached in a completely different way to get people to understand, and to, our own understanding needs to be redefined and re-understood as well. I know that's such a crazy deep place to leave this podcast at its end.
Yeah, it is, because I perhaps against popular opinion, for the most part, I stay so away from these kind of discussions on a podcast, and it's because
I'm sorry if you keep bringing it up.
No, it's not. don't apologize. If I was uncomfortable to the point where, like, we would have had that discussion maybe prior, or like it would, I suppose, like never go out. But I say it because because I'm finding interesting what you're saying, and obviously as brothers we have these conversations off camera all the time. First of all, what was the last thing that you just said?
That we need to approach da'wah in a whole different way and let it be an extension of the expertise we provide to the world.
Sure. So first of all, I suppose the thing I was going to prerequisite with is saying that the reason I feel so apprehensive to speak about the religion on Freshly Grounded to an extent where we're, for example, trying to understand principles and stuff like that is because I know the level of my knowledge, and I know the harms of speaking without knowledge, right? I'm speaking about myself. I'm honestly not speaking about any of my guests or yourself. I know being me, the limits to my knowledge, and I've too many times been humbled when I think I know something, and then years down the line I find out something else, right? And I'm sure we've all been through that. When like we're so like we have a complete understanding of a situation, of a matter, where at that point it's like, oh, there's no one's ever said anything else about it, and then all of a sudden down the line, like through like a specific class and a specific like tudabbar on a specific ayah or hadith, all of a sudden you find out that there's an ikhtilaf on that situation that you were so confident was like so simple. I've been humbled too many times in that way, and therefore even if I think I know something, like that principle I just mentioned to you, that's a principle that exists, like the principle of like the bad outweighing the potential of good, but there's a high chance that I don't know the different contexts in which that applies, and that perhaps there's some contexts in which actually the reverse is true. That could be the case, and therefore I choose not to speak about it. That's one thing. And when I know that the harms of speaking about the religion are so great, when I know that the harms of speaking about the religion without knowledge are so great, it's me who's going to be having to stand in front of Allah on the day of judgment, not the people who are like desperate to hear my opinion on things, right? Especially when like I said, I have such little knowledge. That's what I'm going to prerequisite with. The second thing is specifically with your thing about like you didn't say this because I want to be careful I don't put words into your mouth, but I'm going to categorize it as revisioning how we give da'wah, right? And I know you didn't say those words, so just in case like people try and put that on you, things like that, like all of a sudden do send alerts in my brain to go, oh, don't talk about that because as in to me, not, oh, Hamza, don't talk about that, but oh, Faisal, like don't speak about that, because one, for the reason that I just said about speaking without knowledge, but then secondly, like the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh, but the da'wah was the job of the prophets, and so if the prophets taught, or if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us everything, even to the point of like understanding like how to answer the call of nature, akramakumullah, then surely we would have been taught the job of the prophets, which is da'wah, right? And like from my incredibly limited knowledge, I'm not saying that just to be humble, honestly, from my incredibly limited knowledge, what we know, or what I think I know, is that the way to do da'wah is only by calling to Tawheed, right? And so when it's like we should reversion da'wah, although you are not saying like let's not call to Tawheed, I know you're not saying that, but in my head I'm like thinking, oh, but da'wah is just calling to Tawheed, why should that change? Because that's the way we've been taught how it should be done, like let's move on. Do you know what I mean? Can you understand where I'm coming from?
I get what you're saying, but I have a very different way of looking at things. I think da'wah can be done through exactly what you're saying, but it can also be done through your actions. You know, from a loose term itself, da'wah is something that you do something and somebody becomes inclined to want to understand the religion on a deeper level, or actually accepts Islam. My wife wouldn't be here if there wasn't some level of wouldn't be a Muslim if there was no level of da'wah involved in there from my end and from others.
You're right, but I suppose is that not encapsulated within Tawheed, like the fact that like if you believe in La ilaha illallah, then your actions would resonate that, and so it does still come back to that.
Yeah, exactly. So if the end kind of result is people understanding that message, then whatever ways you take to get people to that point, I think would be considered da'wah. I don't think that's a
Perhaps.
controversial
And that's
thing to
why I
say
feel out
either.
of my depth having these conversations. I'm
Yeah.
not going to cut this conversation out. I'll leave it in. But that is why I feel out of my depth having these conversations, because what you're saying, like, I'm not going to argue it because I understand what you're saying, and of course. But then I just know that I always feel like I always feel like my superpower, just because of lack of a better term, has been understanding where my lane is. And I
think
love to
you're
have these
right.
conversations normally with brothers, but go on.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, I don't want to. I also want to make a disclaimer that I'm not trying to claim that everything I do is like I'm trying to, take people to Islam or things like that. That's
No,
not.
no,
That's
no.
not. That's not how I think about things. But I guess what I was trying to say with that thought was, I do think about the deeper aspects of how Muslims are represented in the UK and how what we identify with as, and even I even hesitate to say the words like the Muslim community and even ummah and things like this. It's just like, well, like I maybe I'm a pessimist to some degree when we talk about these things, because I'm like, is there any unity? Do we speak as this kind of giant homogenous group of people? So I guess I was just saying things like in that sense to say I think about these things to a deeper level, and that extends into my work as well, where it comes
Yeah, you
to
can see that.
questioning. I question things a lot.
Yeah, which isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
You're. I think that we could speak for hours, and I think we will. Like when we go for that eventual coffee, inshallah. Especially now knowing that you're a coffee snob, I expect you to take me to a very niche and small business owned great coffee establishment.
My
When we
brother's
do
house.
eventually eat for that coffee.
Yeah.
Do you know any of those in your area?
My brother is exactly what you just described.
Oh, amazing! What's his company shop? Is it a
No,
shop?
no company. He's a connoisseur, you could say.
Oh, amazing!
Type of guy who buys coffee machines and repairs them,
Oh, wow!
and yeah, he knows his stuff. So maybe we'll do that, or maybe we'll come and get a freshly grounded one.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to have another chat with you, bro, on the podcast and further our conversations. It's been lovely having a natter, and I'll let you get off and get some sleep because you got work in the morning, haven't you? Have you?
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
back
I
at
do.
it.
Yeah, if I'm not feeling feverish in the morning, inshallah.
Well, I'll give you chauffeur.
Can I leave a few plugs?
100%.
Yeah. Well, look, if anybody is interested in architecture and trying to understand it from a kind of a fundamental point of view, but also if you are in the profession or studying it, just check out my YouTube channel. You just search for me, Hamza Shaikh. I imagine my name will be somewhere on the screen, but yeah, also check out my Instagram, hamzashaikh.design. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Send those through, inshallah. We'll make sure we put them in the description.
I appreciate that.
Inshallah, we'll do our very best to remember that.
No
So
worries,
send them
man.
through, inshallah, and I'll put them all in.
Thank you. I will do.
All right, Hamza, it was lovely chatting to you, bro. And we'll catch up, inshallah. This episode is literally going to be out tomorrow. But for those listening, we're filming this at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night, and it's out in on Friday. So that's why it's all dark and stuff as well.
It's dedication from you, man.
No, and yourself, bro. I know. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Hamza.
Thank you.
We'll catch up soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.